On Law Weekly today, we look at issues of business investment and growth. We focus particularly on the repeal and reenactment of the Companies and Allied Matters Act, CAMA. My guest is the former chairman of the Nigerian Bar Association section on business law, Mr. George Etomi. Also on the program, we bring you the highlights from the recent roundtable of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce International Arbitration Center, LACERC, plus our weekly recap of the top trending stories in the courtrooms. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Shola Shoyele. It was on May 15th that the 8th Senate made history with the passage of the repeal and reenactment of the Companies and Allied Matters Act, CAMA, which has been described as the biggest business reform bill in Nigeria in over 28 years. But what are the laudable provisions of this new bill, and what effects will it have on the growth of businesses in Nigeria? What even informed the amendments in the first place? This was the first question I put to my guest, Mr. George Etomi.
It was long overdue because the business climate thrives when the legal and regulatory environment works for it. And most laws must keep pace with the businesses they are meant to be regulating. And as you correctly noted, this is the first major amendment in 28 years. I can assure you from 1990 till today, so much has happened to the business world that that CAMA just didn't capture, just didn't capture. Even things to do with electronic banking, electronic share transfers, and so many of these other things. By way of practice, they've tried to improve upon them, but nothing works better than when you get the fundamentals of the law right, because that's when you begin to attract businesses. For example, what led to all of this was in 2017, the World Bank looked at the ease of doing business indicators, and one of the areas they went to focus on was this whole issue of how the CAC works. The Corporate Affairs Commission. And they looked at things like name reservation, they looked at things like the requirement for minimum share capital requirement. They looked at things like stamp duties, all those things. And they felt in their wisdom that if a fundamental amendment was not made, these things were actually great deterrents to businesses, which is very true. Which is why when we go through each of these amendments that is now proposed, it actually creates a more business-friendly environment. I mean, for example, one of the major changes you will find now is the requirement that a single intending shareholder can actually form a company. In the past, you had to have at least 2 shareholders, which meant that the ordinary small businessman who just wants to start his business has to be saddled with somebody else he may or may not gel with. And that from the beginning creates problems for them. But the board of the CAC,
which is the first
which is the first introduction, it will now operate as an an advisory board. It's going to be like a functional board, and they would now have the powers to review and update the act as we go on. So it is not until such a time as you do another formal major legislative reform. So instead of now having members, as they are so called now, you actually have an advisory board that basically just looks, in fact, they are a governing board. They become like the way you look at schools, for example, the way they run. You can have a board, and then you just also have a governing board. Those are the ones that are hands-on. They deal with issues as they come, and they work with a degree of flexibility.
So we don't have to wait for another 28 years for review. As the problems come up,
you deal with them and all that. And then we go back to the issue of authorized share capital or no authorized share capital. That was also another major drawback. You want to start a business, you authorize share capital, you want to put a decent share capital, 5 million, 10 million, and then you go, they hit you with a high bill for stamp duty. You find that your financial outlay, even before you take the risk, is very high. We've always said that government should never measure the success, its success through what it can get by way of taxes before businesses start. You can tax the business when it's doing well, but it must never be a deterrent. So now it is going to be limited to your minimum issued capital, which is good news, which means you can then regulate your capital and then pay the smallest, barest of stamp duties, so at least the businesses can start. The only worry I have here is that there are certain types of businesses subject to other regulations that require higher thresholds for their share capitals. For example, the maritime businesses, oil and gas and co. So we don't know how all these will play out. But as far as the medium and small concerned, this is welcome. This overhauling of CAMA is actually business friendly for the SMEs, the MSMEs.
But one of the provisions is also that small companies will no longer be required to have AGMs. What's that geared at?
To do an AGM, you have to get a company secretary. You know, you just make it so formal and all whatnot. Now you're not required to, and all that. And just so, just like again, you're not required to submit an audited account if your business, your turnover is less than 10 million and below, or your balance sheet is like 5 million. You don't now have to go and look for the expense of getting an accountant or an auditor to look through your books. The whole idea is to let, first of all, most of the business is actually done at this MSMEs level.